The training facility on Zeraxis 4 hummed with alien efficiency, its chrome corridors reflecting the pale light filtering through reinforced viewports. Beyond those windows lay a barren moonscape devoid of atmosphere where only the hardiest organisms could dream of survival. Sam Chen pressed their face against the cool metal bulkhead, watching the distant glow of the system's twin suns paint jagged shadows across the regolith. "Another day in paradise," muttered Raylin, the tall Zephyrian cadet, whose crystalline skin caught the artificial light as he passed. His 4 arms gestured dismissively at Sam. "I still don't understand why the Academy insists on including primitives in our advanced survival training." Sam turned from the viewport, keeping their expression neutral. After 6 months aboard the station, they'd grown accustomed to the casual dismissal from their alien classmates. The other cadets meant no real malice to them. Humans simply represented an earlier stage of evolution creatures who still relied on crude biology, where others had transcended into beings of pure energy or engineered perfection. "Because," said Zork, the nervous Glythian, whose translucent tentacles twitched constantly, "Commander Torin believes diversity strengthens survival scenarios. Different perspectives, different solutions. Different problems, more likely." Raylin scoffed. "When was the last time any of us needed to know how to start a fire with rocks?" Sam bit back a response. They'd started more than one fire with rocks and saved Raylin's crystalline hide in the process, but pointing that out would only fuel more arguments. Instead, they watched as Dr. Vesh, the facility's xenobiology expert, glided past in her environmental suit, her methane-breathing apparatus creating small puffs of visible gas with each step. The morning briefing commenced in the central hub, a vast spherical chamber, where gravity generators allowed beings from dozens of different worlds to stand comfortably on curved surfaces that defied conventional orientation. Commander Torin, a being of shifting energy, who had never explained their species or homeworld, addressed the assembled cadets. "Today's exercise will test your survival skills in extreme environmental conditions." Torin's voice resonated through translation implants. "You will be sealed within Training Module Epsilon for 72 hours. The module simulates conditions found on Kepler Prime during its storm season. Atmospheric pressure at 12% normal temperature fluctuations from -40 to +60 Celsius and limited oxygen regeneration capability." Sam felt their stomach clench. Kepler Prime had gained notoriety among survival experts for claiming the lives of 3 full exploration teams before being classified as a death world. The training exercise would push everyone to their limits. "The module's life support systems will operate at minimum efficiency," Torin continued. "You must work together to maintain atmospheric balance while completing your assigned tasks. Remember, while this is a simulation, the environmental hazards are real. Safety protocols remain in effect, but rescue may be delayed if circumstances warrant." As the cadets filed toward the sealed training module, Sam noticed Dr. Kelthara checking her tablet with unusual frequency. The Andorian scientist's typically stoic demeanor showed subtle signs of concern, the way her bioluminescent patches flickered slightly faster than normal. How her webbed fingers drummed against the device's surface. "Everything all right, Doctor?" Sam asked as they passed. Kelthara glanced up, her large eyes reflecting the corridor's lighting. "There've been some irregularities in the station's power grid," she admitted quietly. "Solar storm activity has been higher than projected. We've upgraded to backup systems as a precaution." Sam nodded, filing the information away. In their years of wilderness survival training on Earth, they'd learned to pay attention to such details. Technical difficulties had a way of cascading into survival situations when systems were pushed to their limits. The training module itself was an engineering marvel, a series of interconnected chambers that could simulate environmental conditions from hundreds of different worlds. As the 23 cadets entered, Sam noted the subtle hum of air recyclers, the gentle vibration that indicated artificial gravity generators, and the barely perceptible whisper of thermal regulation systems. the module sealed with a series of mechanical clicks and pneumatic hisses. Commander Torn's voice crackled through the communication system. Exercise commences now. Remember, cooperation saves lives. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. The cadets divided into teams based on their specialties. Raylan leading the technology group, establishing communication networks and monitoring systems. Zork heading life sciences, analyzing atmospheric composition and biological needs. Sam finding themselves grouped with the practical applications team, a polite way of saying those who hadn't specialized in advanced technology. The first indication of trouble came from Cassandra, a six-limbed Nexary, whose specialized organs could detect minute changes in atmospheric pressure. "Something's wrong," she announced, her voice carrying a clicking undertone that suggested agitation. "The pressure's dropping too fast." Raylan consulted his holographic display. "Systems show nominal operation. Your sensors must be malfunctioning." "My sensors don't malfunction," Cassandra replied coldly. "We're losing atmosphere." Sam moved to one of the manual pressure gauges, old-fashioned analog instruments that many of the cadets dismissed as primitive backups. The needle showed a steady decline in atmospheric pressure, already below the supposed minimum threshold. "She's right," Sam announced. "Pressure's down to 92% and dropping." The command communication system crackled to life. "Training module Epsilon, this is control. We're detecting fluctuations in your environmental systems. Stand by for diagnostic." Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. Emergency lighting bathed the module in harsh, red illumination as the main power systems failed. The constant hum of life support equipment faded to silence, replaced by the intermittent whir of backup systems struggling to maintain minimal function. "What's happening?" Zork's tentacles writhed anxiously. Raylan's display showed cascading system failures. "Primary power's gone, backups operating but barely holding. The air recyclers have shut down entirely." Sam felt their training kick in the calm focus that had kept them alive in Earth's most hostile environments. "How long do we have?" "At current consumption rates, maybe 40 minutes of breathable air," answered Letha, a pale humanoid whose species could survive on much lower oxygen concentrations. Less for the high oxygen breathers. Several of the cadets began to panic. Voices rose in a dozen languages, translation implants, struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire exchanges of fear and frustration. Some immediately started working on the technological solutions, trying to reroute power, attempting to restart the air recyclers, checking for communication with the outside world. Sam, however, found their attention drawn to something else. In one corner of the module, barely noticed by the others, stood a basic hydroponic unit that had been installed for a previous training exercise and never removed. Old algae cultures still clung to its sides, barely alive after weeks of neglect. An idea began to form. "Listen," Sam called out over the growing chaos. "Everyone quiet for a moment." The command tone in their voice, honed through years of leading expeditions in Earth's wilderness, cut through the panic. The cadets turned to them, some with hope, others with skepticism. "The air recyclers are mechanical," Sam explained, moving to the hydroponic unit. "But there's another way to produce oxygen, a biological one." Raylan's crystalline structure actually creaked as he shifted a sign of extreme stress. "You're suggesting we rely on plant life in a survival situation." "Not just suggesting it. I'm going to do it." Sam began examining the neglected algae cultures. Algae produces oxygen through photosynthesis. If we can get these cultures active again, concentrate them, and provide the right conditions, we can create a sustainable oxygen source. "That's insane," declared Vorth, a silicon-based cadet whose body occasionally sparked with electrical discharge. "Even if it worked, it would take hours to produce meaningful amounts of oxygen. We don't have hours." Sam's hands were already working, scraping algae samples from the hydroponic unit. On Earth, there are emergency protocols using algae for oxygen production. The key is concentration and acceleration. Dr. Vesh, who had been silent since the power failure, spoke up. The human might have a point. In my research on early atmospheric processors, algae cultures were used as backup systems. But the energy requirements can be minimal, Sam finished. We don't need the full facility's worth of oxygen, just enough to keep 23 beings alive. And the waste heat from our bodies, the carbon dioxide we're exhaling, that's all input for the algae. Working quickly, Sam began gathering materials. Water from emergency reserves, trace nutrients from the module's small galley, even improvised light sources from handheld devices. The other cadets watched, some helping reluctantly, others continuing to work on technical solutions. This is madness, Raylan muttered, but Sam noticed he wasn't interfering. The air quality monitors showed oxygen levels continuing to drop 85%, 82%, 79%. Some of the cadets were beginning to show signs of hypoxia difficulty. Concentrating slightly slurred speech, a few losing their balance. Sam worked faster, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. They'd learned algae cultivation during a survival course in Earth's Australian outback, where water scarcity made every biological resource precious. The techniques were simple in principle, but required careful attention to detail. "Lend me your environmental scanners," Sam called to Cassandra. "I need to monitor the culture's progress." The Nexari hesitated, then handed over the devices. "You really think this will work?" "It has to work." Sam checked the readings, adjusting the algae mixture. In Earth's oceans, phytoplankton, tiny algae, produce over half the world's oxygen. We're just scaling that down and speeding it up. 74% oxygen. Several cadets were now sitting down conserving energy. The technological teams had managed to partially restore communication with the outside, but rescue would take hours' time they didn't have. Sam's makeshift algae farm was beginning to show results. Microscopic bubbles rose through the green-tinted water, each one containing precious oxygen. But the production rate was still too slow. "We need more surface area," Sam declared, looking around the module. "Anything flat, anything that can hold a thin layer of algae culture." The cadets began contributing items, data tablets, non-functional without power, serving trays from the galley, even pieces of clothing. Sam spread thin films of the algae mixture across these surfaces, creating dozens of microfarms throughout the module. Dr. Vesh assisted, using her expertise to optimize the nutrient mixture. "You're creating what amounts to a distributed lung," she observed with growing admiration. Multiple small oxygen sources instead of one large one. The air quality monitors now read 68% oxygen. Roland's crystalline form had started to dull, a sign of extreme stress in his species. Zork's tentacles had gone completely still, a defensive mechanism that required significant energy reserves. Sam felt lightheaded themselves, but pushed through, making adjustments to the algae farms. They repositioned light sources, adjusted pH levels, using materials from the module's emergency medical supplies, and even used body heat to warm the cultures in strategic locations. 65%, 63%, 61%. Then finally, the decline began to slow. "It's working," whispered Letha, checking her readings. "Oxygen levels are stabilizing." Sam collapsed against a wall, exhausted. The algae farms throughout the module were now producing visible streams of bubbles. Not enough to bring oxygen levels back to normal, but enough to stop the decline, enough to buy time. "How did you know this would work?" asked Raylan, his voice betraying a new respect. Sam considered the question. "On Earth we have a saying, nature always finds a way. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable." Commander Torrens' voice crackled through the barely functional communication system. "Training module Epsilon, external power restoration in progress. Hold your positions." The cadets waited, breathing carefully, conserving energy. Sam monitored the algae farms, obsessively making micro-adjustments to keep the oxygen production stable. Slowly, the levels crept upward 62%, 63%, 64%. An hour passed. 2 hours. The algae continued their microscopic work, converting carbon dioxide and water into oxygen with billion-year-old efficiency. Some cadets dozed fitfully. Others watched the slowly rising numbers on air quality monitors as if they were lottery results. Finally, power returned with a surge of humming machinery. The main air recyclers came online and oxygen levels began rising steadily. But Sam noted with satisfaction that their algae farms continued producing their output, now measurable as a significant contribution to the module's atmosphere. As the environmental systems fully restored and the hatch opened, Commander Torin entered with a team of technicians. Their energy form seemed particularly intense. As they surveyed the scene, the exhausted cadets, the improvised algae farms spread throughout the module, the readings showing how close they'd come to disaster. "Report," Torin commanded. Dr. Vesh stepped forward. Primary power failure led to complete air recycling system shutdown. The cadets implemented an emergency biological oxygen production system using algae cultures. Torin's attention focused on Sam. "You initiated this solution." "Yes, Commander." "Explain your reasoning." Sam straightened, still weak, but speaking clearly. "The air recyclers are complex mechanical systems dependent on power and computer control. When they failed, I knew we needed an alternative that didn't rely on the same infrastructure. Algae photosynthesis is a biological process, simple, robust, and self-regulating once established. It doesn't need computer control or continuous power input, just basic physical and chemical conditions." "And you learned this technique where?" "Earth survival training, but the principle applies universally. Life finds ways to create the conditions it needs to survive." Commander Torin seemed to consider this. "The official investigation will determine the cause of the power failure. However, I can tell you that it was not part of the training exercise. Without the emergency oxygen production, several cadets would have required immediate medical intervention." The words hung in the air. A real emergency. Real danger, real life saved. In the days that followed, the story spread throughout the academy. Sam found their status among the cadets dramatically changed. Where once they'd been dismissed as primitive, now their classmates sought their input on problems both technical and practical. Raylan approached Sam a week later as they worked in the hydroponics lab, now officially expanded to include research into biological life support systems. "I owe you an apology," the Zephyrian said, his crystalline surface reflecting shame. "And my life." Sam looked up from the algae cultures they were tending. "No apology necessary. We all did what we could with our skills." "But you did what needed to be done with skills the rest of us had dismissed as obsolete." "Not obsolete," Sam corrected. "Just undervalued. There's a place for high technology and survival, but there's also a place for understanding the basic principles of life itself." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Vesh, who entered carrying a data tablet. "Sam, the commander wants to see you." In Torin's office, surrounded by displays showing the Academy's various training facilities, Sam waited as the energy being reviewed reports. "The investigation is complete," Torin announced. The power failure was caused by a solar storm interaction with the station's new experimental power collectors, a design flaw that allowed feedback into the primary systems during peak activity. Sam nodded, waiting for the real purpose of this meeting to be revealed. "Your solution demonstrated something we have perhaps overlooked in our advanced training protocols," Torin continued. "Redundancy is not just about multiple technical systems. True redundancy includes different approaches to the same problem." "Yes, Commander." "We are implementing new curriculum modifications. All cadets will now receive basic biological life support training. You will assist in developing this program." Sam felt a surge of satisfaction. "I'd be honored to help." Additionally, Torin's form shifted, indicating what Sam had learned was their equivalent of a smile. The algae oxygen production method you demonstrated is being incorporated into the Academy's emergency protocols, a simple biological backup for complex technological systems. As Sam left the meeting, they reflected on the strange turn their Academy experience had taken. They'd joined expecting to be the student learning from more advanced beings. Instead, they'd become a teacher sharing knowledge that their classmates had never thought to acquire. In the training module that night, Zork found Sam tending to the algae cultures that were now a permanent installation. "Do you really believe those saying?" the Glythian asked. "That nature always finds a way." Sam watched the tiny bubbles of oxygen rising through the green water, each one a product of microscopic life, working with relentless efficiency. "I've seen life persist in places that should be impossible," they said. Bacteria in boiling springs, plants growing in rock cracks, creatures thriving in the deep ocean without sunlight. Life doesn't just find a way, it finds dozens of ways, hundreds of ways, some we haven't even discovered yet. "And humans," Sam smiled. "Humans are just part of nature. We find ways too. Sometimes with technology, sometimes without, but always with ingenuity." The algae continued their work, converting waste into life, turning crisis into opportunity. It was a lesson that would stay with every cadet who had lived through those terrifying hours when simple biology proved more reliable than the most advanced technology. In the Academy records, the incident would be remembered as Training Module Epsilon Crisis, a case study in emergency procedures and system redundancy, but for those who were there, it would always be remembered as the day a primitive human taught them that sometimes the oldest solutions are the most elegant. That survival isn't just about having the best technology, it's about understanding the fundamental principles of life itself. Years later, as these cadets spread throughout the galaxy, many would carry with them emergency algae cultivation kits, small tubes containing dormant cultures that could spring to life when needed. They called them SAM kits. Informally, though the official designation was Biological Emergency Oxygen Systems. And whenever they faced impossible situations, they would remember the lesson learned in a damaged training module, that sometimes when all your technology fails, when all your advanced systems shut down, the answer lies not in more complexity, but in the simple, elegant solutions that life itself discovered billions of years ago. The Academy never forgot that lesson, and neither did Sam, who went on to develop some of the most robust biological backup systems in known space, always remembering that survival isn't about the tools you have. It's about understanding how life itself refuses to give up, no matter how impossible the circumstances may seem. Life finds a way, and sometimes when you think like life, instead of thinking like a machine, you find ways too.